Have you ever walked into a room where the air suddenly feels heavy, like the oxygen just got sucked out? Because you entered, not because you did something wrong, but simply because you showed up in a body that wasn't expected there. That's my life. That's been my life for 50 years. People see the tailored suits, the expensive watch, and the way I carry my briefcase. But they don't see the scars I've collected, just trying to exist in spaces that were never built for me. I'm Sarah, and today, I'm going to tell you about the day a single flight changed everything. Not just for me, but for an entire corporation. Before we get into the heat of this, tell me, where are you watching this from? Are you in a city that feels like home? Or are you still fighting for your seat at the table? Drop a comment below. I read them all. And if you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that subscribe button. We've got a lot to talk about. The morning started like any other high-stakes day. I was at O'Hare, the heart of Chicago's chaos. The airport was a sea of moving bodies, a frantic symphony of rolling suitcases and overhead announcements. I felt good. No, I felt powerful. I was headed to New York to close a deal that had been 2 years in the making, a merger that would put my educational tech company at the forefront of the industry. I had earned this. I had worked 80-hour weeks, missed birthdays, and sacrificed sleep for a decade to get to this point. When I walked toward the first-class check-in line, I held my head high. I knew I belonged there. But the first crack in the glass appeared before I even touched my boarding pass. I stood in the priority lane, the one with the thick, plush carpet and the gold-trimmed signs. There were 3 people ahead of me, all white men in business casual attire. The gate agent, a middle-aged woman with a tight bun and a smile that looked like it was painted on, chirped good morning and safe travels to each of them. When it was my turn, the smile didn't just fade, it vanished. It was replaced by a look of confused scrutiny. "The economy line is over there, ma'am," she said, pointing a manicured finger toward the back of the terminal where the line snaked around a corner. I didn't get angry. I've learned that anger is the first thing they use against us to call us aggressive. I just smiled. That calm, practice CEO smile, and handed her my black diamond tier card. "I'm in 1A, I said softly. She took the card like it might bite her. She swiped it, stared at the screen for a long beat, then looked back at me, searching my face for a lie. The silence stretched. People behind me started huffing, checking their watches. I felt their eyes on the back of my neck. They weren't looking at my success. They were looking at a problem. "Everything all right?" I asked, keeping my voice smooth as silk. "The system is slow," she muttered, finally printing the pass and sliding it across the counter without a word. "No, thank you. No, have a nice flight." Just a cold, hard piece of paper. I took it and walked away, feeling that familiar sting. It's like a paper cut on the soul. One doesn't kill you, but after 1,000 of them, you start to bleed out. I made my way to the first-class lounge. This was supposed to be my sanctuary. I needed the quiet to go over the final merger documents. I found a corner chair, upholstered in deep blue velvet, and opened my laptop. I ordered a green tea. The server brought it, but he set it down on the table next to mine, not even looking me in the eye. I watched him walk away and then look back at me from the bar, whispering something to his colleague. I tried to focus on the numbers, revenue projections, employee retention rates, the future of thousands of kids who would benefit from our software. But the atmosphere in that lounge was suffocating. Every time I looked up, I caught someone staring. It wasn't the "oh, she looks successful" kind of stare. It was the who let her in. Kinda stare. It's a weight you carry. A constant awareness of your own skin. You start to wonder if there's dirt on your face, or if your hair is out of place. But then you realize it's just you. You are the dirt in their pristine world. I thought about my mother. She spent 30 years cleaning houses in suburbs where she wasn't allowed to stay after dark. She used to come home with her hands raw from bleach, smelling like lemon ammonia and tired dreams. She'd sit me down and say, "Sarah, you have to be twice as good to get half as far. Don't you ever give them an excuse to look down on you." So, I became 4 times as good. I dressed better, spoke clearer, worked harder, and yet, here I was, a CEO in a velvet chair, and I could still smell the lemon ammonia of the world's prejudice. When they finally called for boarding, I felt a sense of relief. Once I was on that plane, in my seat, I could disappear into my work. I walked down the jet bridge, the air getting cooler and smelling of jet fuel and recycled air. I stepped onto the aircraft, and the lead flight attendant greeted the man in front of me by name. "Welcome back, Mr. Henderson." Then it was my turn. She looked at my boarding pass, looked at me, and her eyebrows knitted together. "1A?" she asked, her voice rising in a way that felt like a question she already knew the answer to. "Yes," I said. "1A, I'll need to verify this with the purser," she said, stepping back and blocking the aisle. "Is there a problem?" I asked. I could feel the heat rising in my chest now. The paper cuts were starting to throb. Just a security protocol for high-value seating. She lied. I knew it was a lie because Mr. Henderson, who was currently sipping a mimosa 3 feet away, hadn't been verified. I stood there in the narrow galley, being bumped by people boarding for the main cabin. Each person who squeezed past me gave me a look, some curious, some annoyed. I was an obstacle. I was a glitch in the matrix. I stood my ground, my feet planted firmly on the carpet, refusing to move to the side like a servant. I am the daughter of a woman who scrubbed floors so I could fly, and I wasn't going to budge. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she came back. "Right this way," she said, though the warmth in her voice was non-existent. I sat down in 1A. It was a beautiful pod, wide leather seat, a large screen, noise-canceling headphones waiting in a silk pouch. I tucked my briefcase under the ottoman and buckled my seatbelt. I took a deep breath, trying to let the tension drain out of my shoulders. I closed my eyes for a second, imagining the moment I'd sign those papers in New York. I could see the ink drying. I could feel the triumph. But the peace didn't last. 10 minutes before the doors were scheduled to close, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. I felt a presence hovering over me. I didn't open my eyes at first, hoping if I ignored it, it would go away. But then came the voice, a sharp, nasal tone that cut through my meditation like a knife. "Excuse me, I think you're in our seats." I opened my eyes. Standing in the aisle was a white couple, probably in their late 50s. The man was wearing a polo shirt with a country club logo, and the woman had on enough gold jewelry to weigh down a small bird. She was looking at me with a mixture of disgust and impatience, as if I were a piece of gum stuck to the bottom of her shoe. I checked my boarding pass again, just to be absolutely certain. "I'm in 1A, I said politely. "This is my seat." The man stepped forward, leaning into my personal space. He didn't look at my pass. He looked at me, really looked at me, with a sneer that told me exactly what he thought I was worth. "There must be a mistake," he said, his voice loud enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. We always book these 2 seats. You don't belong in 1A. Check your ticket again. Girl, you're probably in the back. The word girl hit me like a physical blow. It's a word designed to diminish, to strip away decades of adulthood and achievement in a single syllable. I felt my grip tighten on the armrest, my knuckles turning a lighter shade under the pressure. The cabin went silent. I could see Mr. Henderson looking over his newspaper. I could see the other passengers staring. Nobody said a word. The silence was the loudest thing in the room. I am not a girl, I said, my voice low and vibrating with a controlled power. I am a passenger who paid for this seat. If there is a discrepancy, you can take it up with the crew, but I am not moving. The woman let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Oh, honey, don't be difficult. We just want to sit together. I'm sure they have a nice spot for you in the back, where you'll be more comfortable with your own kind. The blatantness of it took my breath away. It wasn't even coded anymore. It was raw, ugly, and naked. I looked toward the galley, hoping for a flight attendant to intervene, to remind these people of the rules of civilization. I saw the lead attendant, the one who had verified me earlier, whispering to another crew member. They weren't coming to help me. They were watching, waiting to see how I would react. The man turned toward the cockpit door, which was slightly ajar. "Captain," he shouted, "we have a problem up here." I sat there, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wasn't scared of them, but I was terrified of the familiar machinery of the world that was about to grind me down. I looked out the small oval window at the tarmac, at the luggage carts and the fuel trucks, feeling a sudden, overwhelming sense of isolation. I was 30,000 feet of potential energy away from the ground, yet I had never felt more buried. A moment later, the cockpit door swung open fully. The captain stepped out. He was a tall man, silver-haired, with 4 gold stripes on his shoulders that caught the cabin light. He didn't look like a man of peace. He looked like a man of order. He didn't look at the couple first. He looked directly at me, and in that split second, before he even opened his mouth, I saw the verdict in his eyes. He didn't see a CEO. He didn't see a diamond-tier traveler. He saw a disruption. The man in the polo shirt started talking immediately, his voice filled with the entitlement of 1,000 generations. "Captain, this person is in our seat. We have a long flight, and we need to be together. She's being extremely aggressive and refusing to move." The captain nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving mine. He didn't ask to see their tickets. He didn't ask for my side of the story. He just stepped closer, his shadow falling over me, extinguishing the last bit of sunlight streaming through the window. He cleared his throat, a sound like gravel grinding together, and pointed a finger toward the back of the plane. "Ma'am," he said, his voice booming with the authority of the sky, "I need you to gather your things. Now." I stared up at him, my mouth dry, my pulse thumping in my ears. The cabin felt like it was shrinking, the walls closing in, the air growing thin before we had even left the gate. I looked at the gold stripes on his arm, then back to his cold, unyielding face. The couple behind him was smiling now, a thin, cruel line of victory. I felt the weight of my briefcase under my feet, containing the future of my company, and for the first time in my life, I felt the sheer, crushing weight of being completely, utterly alone in a room full of people. I didn't move. I couldn't move. I just sat there, my hand trembling slightly as I reached for my phone, my mind racing through 1,000 scenarios. each one darker than the last, while the captain's hand moved toward the intercom, his eyes narrowing as he prepared to deliver his final ultimatum. The captain's ultimatum hung in the pressurized air like a physical threat. I looked at that outstretched finger, the one signaling my exile to the back of the aircraft, and for a heartbeat, the world went silent. It's a strange thing, how adrenaline works. You'd think I'd be shaking with fear, but instead, a cold, crystalline clarity settled over me. This wasn't just about a seat anymore. This was about every door that had ever been slammed in my face. Every no I had turned into a yes, and every time I had been told to wait my turn by people who hadn't even started the race. I believe you've skipped a few steps in your protocol, Captain, I said. My voice didn't shake. It was the voice I used in boardrooms when a competitor tried to lowball us. Flat, immovable, and dangerous. You haven't checked my credentials. You haven't verified the manifest. And you're currently acting on the hearsay of 2 passengers who just used a racial slur to address a paying customer. The pilot's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone he had already mentally dismissed. My aircraft, my rules. He barked. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, and I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. You are being non-compliant and creating a hostile environment. If you don't stand up and move to the designated seat in the rear, I will have airport security escort you off this plane in zip ties. Do you understand the gravity of that? Or do I need to make it clearer? The woman with the gold jewelry let out a theatrical sigh, leaning against the headrest of the seat I was still occupying. Oh, just drag her off already. Roger, she said, addressing the captain by his first name as if they were old country club pals. We're going to be late for our brunch at the Hamptons. It's always the same with these people. Looking for a fight where there isn't one. These people. The phrase echoed in the cabin. I looked around. Mr. Henderson had turned his head away, suddenly very interested in the safety instruction card. A young man across the aisle caught my eye for a split second, looked down, and started typing furiously on his phone. Maybe he was recording. Maybe he was just hiding. But nobody stood up. That's the part that stings the most. You know, it's not just the villain in the story. It's the audience that watches the play and refuses to boo. I felt a surge of heat behind my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but the kind of heat that forged the steel in my spine. I thought about the flight I took 20 years ago. My first ever. Going to a job interview. I sat in the very last row, next to the lavatory, smelling the blue chemicals and feeling lucky just to be on the plane. I had promised myself that day that I would never be pushed to the back again. Not by life, and certainly not by a man with a god complex and a pilot's license. I reached into my bag. The captain tensed, his hand twitching toward his radio, as if I were pulling out a weapon. I pulled out my phone. I'm moving, I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet it carried to the last row of first class. Not because you're right, but because I need to see exactly how far this airline is willing to fall. I unbuckled my seatbelt. The click sounded like a gunshot in the quiet cabin. I stood up, smoothing the wrinkles in my Armani trousers. I felt tall, taller than the captain, taller than the sneering man in the polo shirt. I reached down and pulled my briefcase from under the ottoman. It was heavy, filled with the blueprints of a deal that could save this very airline from the financial tailspin it had been in for the last 3 fiscal quarters. The irony was so thick it was almost poetic. As I began the long walk down the aisle, the humiliation was a physical weight, Every step felt like walking through waist-deep water. I passed the soft curtain that separated the elite from the rest of the world. The flight attendants stood like statues, their eyes fixed on the ceiling or the floor, refusing to acknowledge the crime against dignity happening right in front of them. When I reached the main cabin, the atmosphere changed. It was louder here, more cramped, smelling of pretzels and anxiety. People watched me pass, a woman in a high-end suit being led to the back like a prisoner. I found the seat they had graciously assigned me. It was 34E, a middle seat in the very last row, right against the bulkhead. The seat didn't even recline. I had to ask a teenage boy with headphones and an elderly woman clutching a rosary to stand up so I could crawl in. The space was so narrow, my knees hit the seat in front of me. There was a discarded candy wrapper in the seat pocket and a faint stain on the tray table. I sat down. My briefcase clutched on my lap like a shield. The man in the polo shirt and his wife were now tucked into 1A and 1B, probably sipping the champagne I had paid for. The captain had retreated to his cockpit. His order restored, I looked at the woman next to me. She looked tired. She had a faded tattoo on her wrist and a kind, weary face. She looked at my suit, then at my face, and she saw it. She saw the tremor in my hands that I couldn't quite hide. "You okay?" "Honey," she whispered, leaning in so the boy on the other side wouldn't hear. I tried to swallow the lump in my throat. "I've been better," I managed to say. "I saw what they did," she said, her voice trembling with a quiet rage. "It's not right. It's never been right. I'm sorry you have to deal with that." That small spark of human kindness was almost my undoing. I felt a sob threaten to break through my composure, but I pushed it back down. I couldn't afford to be the crying woman. I had to be the CEO. I had to be Sarah. I took a deep breath, the air back here tasting of dust and communal breath, and I opened my laptop. The screen glowed, illuminating the faces of my board of directors in their headshots on my desktop. I looked at the Wi-Fi icon on my screen. It was grayed out. We were still at the gate. I looked at the time. We were 5 minutes from pushback. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I thought about the years of negotiations, the late-night dinners with the airline's board, the way they had begged my firm for an injection of capital to modernize their fleet and expand their routes. They needed me. They needed my black money to keep their white planes in the air. I thought about the captain's face. I thought about the word girl. I didn't open the merger documents. Instead, I opened my contacts. I scrolled down to a name that most people in the aviation industry only spoke in hushed tones. Marcus Sterling, the chairman of the board of this very airline, and a man who happened to owe his first tech investment success to my mentorship. I looked at the call button. My heart was racing, not with fear anymore, but with the cold, hard realization of what I was about to do. This wasn't just a phone call. It was a demolition order. The engines began to whine, a low-pitched hum that vibrated through the floorboards and up into the soles of my shoes. The fastened seatbelt sign chimed, a cheerful, plastic sound that mocked my situation. Outside, the tug was connecting to the nose gear, preparing to push us back into the taxiway, away from the terminal, away from the world where I had a voice. I looked at the woman with the rosary. She was praying. I realized I was praying too. In a way, I was praying for the strength to not just survive this, but to dismantle the system that allowed it to happen. I tapped the screen. The phone began to dial. 1 ring. 2 rings. "Sarah." Marcus's voice came through, clear and surprised. "I thought you'd be in the air by now." We're all set for the signing tomorrow morning in Manhattan. The press release is already drafted. I looked at the back of the seat in front of me, at the scratched plastic and the safety first sticker. I felt the plane jerk slightly as the brakes were released. "Marcus," I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from a long distance away, yet steady as a mountain. "We need to talk about the culture of your company, because as of right now, the merger is off. And I'm going to tell you exactly why, while I sit in the back of your plane next to the toilet." I felt the aircraft begin to move backward, the terminal sliding out of view, and I gripped the phone so hard I thought the glass might shatter against my ear. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could almost hear Marcus's brain trying to process the sheer weight of what I had just said. In the world of high finance, a no at the 11th hour is a heart attack. A no based on a moral violation is a death sentence. The plane continued its slow, mechanical crawl backward, the tug lurching as it steered us toward the taxiway. Around me, the cabin was a cacophony of rustling snack bags and muffled conversations. But in my ears, there was only the sound of a crumbling empire. "Sarah, wait," Marcus finally stammered, his voice dropping an octave into a tone of pure panic. "What do you mean the merger is off? We've spent 18 months on this. The board has already factored the capital injection into the quarterly forecast. If you pull out now, our credit rating will be downgraded by morning. What happened? Where are you?" "I'm exactly where your employees think I belong, Marcus," I replied, staring at the chipped gray paint of the seat in front of me. I described it to him, not with anger, but with a clinical, devastating precision. I told him about the gate agent's scowl, the flight attendant's verification of my existence, and the captain's finger pointing toward the back of the bus like I was a piece of faulty luggage. I told him about the girl comment and the Hamptons brunch. I told him how it felt to be a billionaire investor sitting in seat 34E because a man with 4 stripes on his shoulder couldn't fathom that a woman who looks like me could own the air he flies in. As I spoke, the plane came to a halt. We were positioned on the tarmac, engines idling with a low, hungry growl. I knew the flight deck was waiting for clearance to taxi to the runway. I am sitting next to a woman holding a rosary who has more dignity in her pinky finger than your entire flight crew has in their bodies. I continued, my voice gaining a razor-sharp edge. "You told me this airline was the future of inclusive travel. But your future looks a lot like my mother's past. And I don't invest in the past. Sarah, please, stay on the line," Marcus pleaded. I could hear him muffledly shouting at someone in his office, probably his secretary or the COO. "Don't hang up. I'm calling the operations center. We are going to fix this. Just give me 5 minutes. You have until the wheels leave the ground, Marcus. After that, my lawyers will handle the rest." I lowered the phone but didn't disconnect. The woman next to me was watching me, her eyes wide. She didn't know the specifics, but she knew power when she heard it. I felt a strange sense of detachment. It was as if I were watching myself from the ceiling of the cabin, a woman in a rumpled Armani suit, squeezed into a middle seat, holding the fate of a multi-billion-dollar corporation in the palm of her hand. Suddenly, the plane's intercom crackled to life. It wasn't the usual prepare for a takeoff announcement. It was the captain's voice again, but the arrogance was gone. It sounded strained, wavering, like a man who had just seen a ghost. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the flight deck. We've been, instructed by ground control to return to the gate due to a technical discrepancy. We apologize for the delay. We should be back at the terminal in just a few moments. A collective groan went up from the passengers. The teenage boy next to me cursed under his breath, adjusting his headphones. But I just sat there, my heart thumping a slow, rhythmic beat of vindication. The plane began to turn, not toward the runway, but in a wide, humbling U-turn back toward the jet bridge. I looked at my laptop screen. My internal dashboard was still open. I saw the news alerts starting to flicker on the side of the browser. In the world of algorithmic trading, whispers move faster than sound. Someone, somewhere, had caught wind of a major snag in the merger negotiations. I watched the stock ticker for the airline. It was a green line that had been steady all morning. Then, it hitched. It flattened. And then, it began a jagged, terrifying descent into the red. 10%, 15%. The value of the company was evaporating in real time, bled out by the arrogance of a pilot who thought he was king of his little metal tube. We bumped against the gate with a dull thud. The fastened seatbelt sign stayed on, but the cabin was electric with confusion. Through the window, I saw black SUVs screaming across the tarmac, their lights flashing. This wasn't standard procedure. This was an emergency. The cockpit door must have opened, because I heard a commotion from the front of the plane, even from 34ER. The tension was palpable. Then, over the intercom, a new voice spoke, not the captain's, and not a recorded message. It was the voice of the lead purser, and she sounded like she was on the verge of tears. Could Miss Sarah Jenkins please identify herself? Please stay in your seat. Miss Jenkins, a representative from the corporate office is boarding to meet you. The entire plane turned to look at me. The woman with the rosary let out a small, "Oh my." The teenage boy finally took off his headphones, staring at me like I was a superhero or a high-profile criminal. I didn't say a word. I didn't stand up. I just closed my laptop with a definitive snap and waited. A few minutes later, the sea of passengers in the aisle parted. It was like the parting of the Red Sea. Coming down the narrow walkway was a man in a navy blue suit, the regional director of operations, followed by the lead purser, who looked ghostly pale. They reached row 34. The director looked at the cramped seat, at the candy wrapper in the pocket, and then at me. His face fell. The shame was so thick you could have carved it with a knife. "Ms. Jenkins," he said, his voice barely audible. "On behalf of the chairman and the entire board, I offer our most profound and humble apologies. There has been a catastrophic failure in our service standards today. Please, if you would allow us, we would like to escort you off the aircraft immediately. We have a private lounge waiting, and the chairman is on a video link." I looked at him. Then I looked at the flight attendant standing behind him, the one who had verified my seat. She couldn't even meet my gaze. "And the captain?" I asked quietly. "The one who told me he'd have me in zip ties for sitting in a seat I paid for." The director swallowed hard. "Captain Miller has been relieved of duty, effective immediately. He is currently being questioned by corporate security. His career with this airline is over." I felt a cold shiver of justice. But it didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a funeral for a world that shouldn't exist. I looked at the woman sitting next to me. I reached into my bag and pulled out my business card, sliding it into her hand. "If you ever need anything," I whispered to her. "You call me." I stood up. My knees were stiff from the cramped quarters. I stepped into the aisle, smoothing my jacket for the last time. As I walked back toward the front of the plane, the silence was absolute. I passed the curtain into first class. There, In seats 1A and 1B were the couple from the country club. They weren't smiling anymore. They were huddled together, looking small and terrified as they watched the regional director carry my briefcase like it was a holy relic. The man in the polo shirt tried to say something, maybe an apology, maybe a plea, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of a glance. I walked past them as if they were ghosts, nothing more than shadows in a cabin that was no longer theirs to rule. I reached the doorway of the plane. The bridge was cool, the air smelling of the terminal, and the promise of a different kind of power. I stopped at the threshold, my foot hovering over the gap between the aircraft and the gate. I looked back at the 1A stitched into the leather of the front row, then turned my head to face the bank of cameras and frantic executives waiting for me in the terminal. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the phone in my hand, and stepped out into the light of a crisis I had created and only I could solve. The jet bridge floor felt solid beneath my feet, a stark contrast to the vibrating, pressurized cage I had just escaped. As I stepped into the terminal, the sheer scale of the chaos I had unleashed became visible. The airport lounge wasn't just a place for waiting anymore. It had become a war room. Executives in suits that cost more than a mid-sized sedan were pacing frantically, their eyes glued to flickering tablets showing the airline's stock plummeting like a stone in a well. I watched a digital ticker on a nearby wall. The red numbers were bleeding out, wiping away millions of dollars with every tick of the clock. Sarah, thank God. A voice boomed. Marcus Sterling was there in the flesh. Having raced from his satellite office, he looked like he'd aged 10 years and 60 minutes. His tie was loosened, and his forehead was slick with sweat. He reached out to take my hand, but I kept mine firmly at my side. I wasn't here for a handshake. I was here for an accounting. My office. Now, I said. It wasn't a request. We moved into a private VIP suite, the heavy oak doors muffling the roar of the terminal. Marcus sank into a chair, his head in his hands. It's a bloodbath. Sarah, the news of the failed merger leaked to the wires 5 minutes ago. The market thinks we've hit an iceberg. If you don't sign that deal, we won't just be downgraded. We'll be liquidated by the end of the month. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the very plane I had been kicked off. Ground crews were swarming it. But to me, it looked like a hollow metal shell. You're worried about liquidation, Marcus. I was worried about my humanity, I said, my voice echoing off the glass. You built a company that allows a man to weaponize his uniform against a woman because of the shade of her skin. You didn't just have a service failure. You have a rot in the foundation. We fired him, Marcus shouted, desperation cracking his voice. Miller is gone. The purser is gone. We'll issue a public apology. We'll name a scholarship after your mother. Just, please, save the company. I turned to face him. This was the transformation. For years, I had played their game, followed their rules, and climbed their ladders. I thought that by reaching the top, I'd be immune to the venom. I was wrong. The only way to stop the venom is to change the nature of the beast. I will sign the deal, I said. Marcus let out a breath of pure relief, but I held up a finger to cut him off. But the terms have changed. I don't just want 25% of the equity. I want a seat on the board with veto power over all HR and sensitivity training protocols. And I want a public, transparent audit of every discrimination complaint filed against this airline in the last decade. I leaned over the mahogany desk, looking him dead in the eye. I'm not just investing in your planes anymore. Marcus, I'm buying the right to fix your soul. If you refuse, I walk out that door, and you can watch your stock hit 0 from the sidewalk. He didn't hesitate. He couldn't. He signaled his assistant to bring the revised documents. As I put pen to paper, the ink felt heavy, significant. I wasn't just signing a check. I was signing a manifesto. As the sun began to set over the tarmac, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold, I felt a strange sense of closure. I thought about the woman with the rosary in seat 34E. I thought about the girl comment that was supposed to break me, but instead became the spark that lit the fire. I realized that my power didn't come from my bank account or my title. It came from the fact that I refused to disappear. I walked back out into the main terminal alone. I didn't need an escort anymore. People were staring at their phones, reading the breaking news that the merger was back on, that the airline had been saved by a visionary partner. They looked at me, and some recognized the face from the business journals. But most just saw a black woman walking with her head held high. I stopped by a coffee kiosk. The young man behind the counter looked tired, his uniform a bit wrinkled. He looked at me and smiled. A real, genuine smile. Rough day at the airport. "Ma'am?" he asked. I smiled back, feeling the weight of the world lift just a little bit. It was a long flight, I said, but the landing was perfect. I looked at the camera of my own mind, imagining all of you watching this. We all have our 34E moments. We all have times when the world tries to tell us we don't belong in the front row. But remember this, your value isn't something they can take away unless you hand it to them. Hold on to your seat, keep your head up, and if they try to push you out, make sure you're the one who owns the floor they're standing on. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. This isn't just my story, it's ours. If this resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for your dignity, share your story in the comments. Let's start a conversation that they can't ignore. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of resilience and justice. I'm Sarah, and I'll see you at the top. Safe travels, everyone. The silk scarf tied around my neck always felt a little too tight, like a beautiful corporate noose. For 12 years, I had worn the navy blue uniform of this airline with a mixture of pride and quiet desperation. Being a lead purser wasn't just about serving champagne or demonstrating how to use an oxygen mask. It was about managing egos, the massive, fragile egos of men who flew the planes and the men who paid for the front row seats. I had learned early on that, in the sky, the truth was, whatever the person with the most stripes or the biggest bank account said it was, on the morning of the flight that would change everything. I stood at the door of the Boeing 777, my smile practiced and immovable. I watched the passengers board. Most were a blur of tired eyes and expensive luggage. Then, I saw the woman who would become my catalyst, Sarah. She walked down the jet bridge with a quiet, grounded power that made me straighten my own back. But when she handed me her boarding pass for 1A, I felt a familiar, cold prickle at the base of my spine. I knew Captain Roger Miller. I had flown with him for 5 years. He was a legacy pilot, the kind who thought the airline was a country club, and he was the founding member. He had a specific, unspoken rule about who belonged in the first 2 rows. I had seen him find technical reasons to move people of color to the back before. I had seen him verify tickets until the passenger grew so frustrated they asked to be moved. Every time it happened, I felt a piece of my soul chip away. But I stayed silent. I had a mortgage. I had a 6-year-old daughter, Chloe, who thought her mommy was a hero because she worked among the clouds. I'll need to verify this with the purser. I had told Sarah I was the purser. I didn't need to verify anything. But I saw Miller watching from the cockpit door. His eyes narrowed, and I folded. I became a cog in the machine of his prejudice. I watched Sarah stand there, an island of dignity in a sea of microaggressions, and I hated myself. I hated the scarf around my neck. I hated the way I lowered my gaze when she looked at me, searching for an ally. The confrontation in the cabin was like watching a slow-motion car crash. When the couple in the country club gear started their girl routine, the air in first class turned toxic. I stood in the galley, my hands trembling as I prepped the pre-departure drinks. I could hear the man's voice, loud, entitled, sharp. I could hear Sarah's voice, low, steady, immovable. I waited for the other passengers to say something. Mr. Henderson, a regular, looked at his watch. The tech guy in 2B put on his noise-canceling headphones. The silence was a physical weight. Then came Miller. He stepped out of the cockpit, not as a pilot, but as an enforcer. He didn't ask for the manifest. He didn't check the seating chart. He simply saw a problem to be removed, so the right people could be happy. When he pointed that finger toward the back of the plane, I felt a wave of nausea. I wanted to scream. She paid for that seat. She's a Diamond member. But Miller looked at me, a silent command in his eyes that said, "Support me, or you're next." I watched Sarah walk away. I watched her carry her briefcase with more grace than I had ever seen in a human being. As she passed the curtain into the main cabin, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had left a fire burning in her wake. And I was the one standing in the embers. 10 minutes later, the world ended. We were pushing back when the cockpit radio erupted. It wasn't the tower. It was the operations center. And they weren't just giving orders. They were screaming. I stayed near the cockpit door, my ear pressed to the metal. I heard the captain's voice go from arrogant to confused, then to terrified. "Who?" Miller shouted. "What do you mean, the lead investor? That's impossible." She was being non-compliant. The response from the ground must have been devastating. I heard the sound of a fist hitting the console. Miller stumbled out of the cockpit a moment later, his face the color of ash. He looked at me, but he didn't see me. He saw the end of his career. "Turn it around." He whispered, "We have to turn the plane around." The walk to the back of the plane to find Sarah was the longest journey of my life. I was the one who had to lead the regional director to row 34. Every passenger I passed was staring, sensing the shift in gravity. When we reached her, she was sitting in a middle seat, her knees pushed up against the seat in front of her, her laptop glowing. She looked like a queen who had been forced to sit in the dirt. Yet she hadn't lost a bit of her majesty. When the director offered the apology, Sarah didn't look at him. She looked at me. It was a long, searching look that stripped away my uniform, my title, and my excuses. She saw my fear. She saw my silence. And yet, she slid her business card into the hand of the woman sitting next to her, a woman who had shown her more kindness in 10 minutes than I had in 12 years. After Sarah left the plane, the atmosphere was haunting. The couple in 1A was being questioned by corporate security. Miller was being led away in handcuffs, not because of the seat, but because the audit she triggered had already uncovered years of his discrepancies. I stood in the empty first-class cabin, looking at seat 1A. It was just a chair, but to Sarah, it was a fortress she had defended. To Miller, it was a throne he had lost. 2 days later, I was called to the corporate headquarters in Chicago. I expected to be fired. I had already packed my locker. I had already practiced how I would tell Chloe that Mommy wouldn't be flying for a while. I was led into a glass-walled office. Sarah was there. She was sitting at a massive mahogany table, a cup of green tea in front of her. She looked exactly the same as she did in seat 34E, composed, powerful, and utterly in control. "Sit down. Maya," she said. I sat. My heart was a drum in my chest. "Ms. Jenkins, I don't know what to say. I'm so sorry. I should have spoken up. I knew it was wrong. Why didn't you?" she asked. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question. I was afraid. I whispered. "The captain, the culture, if you challenge them, you disappear. I have a daughter. I couldn't risk it." Sarah leaned forward. "That fear is what they bank on, Maya. They build systems where the good people are too busy surviving to be brave. But a system that requires you to trade your soul for a paycheck is a failed system." She pushed a folder toward me. "I'm the new head of the board's ethics committee. I'm creating a role, director of in-flight integrity. I don't want a suit from HR. I want someone who has been in the galley, someone who knows exactly how the rot feels. I want you to help me rewrite the handbook." I stared at her. "You want me, after I did nothing?" "You didn't do nothing," Sarah said, a small, knowing smile appearing on her face. "I saw your face when Miller pointed his finger. You were hurting. You just didn't have the floor beneath you to stand on. Now, I'm giving you the floor. Don't waste it." My first day in the new office felt like stepping onto a different planet. I wasn't wearing the silk scarf anymore. I was wearing a sharp, navy blazer and a pair of trousers that let me walk with purpose. My desk was piled with files, reports of discrimination, bullying, and misunderstandings that had been buried for decades. I spent the morning reading a report from a young flight attendant in Atlanta who had been fired for insubordination when she refused to move a family of 5 to the back to make room for a VIP's luggage. I picked up the phone. "Get me the Atlanta base manager," I said. My voice sounded different. It didn't have the customer service lilt. It was firm. It was the voice of a woman who was no longer managing egos, but enforcing dignity. At noon, my phone buzzed. It was a photo from Chloe's teacher. They were drawing pictures of what they wanted to be when they grew up. Chloe had drawn a woman standing on top of a mountain, holding a giant book. The caption read, "My mommy makes the world fair." I felt a lump in my throat. I looked out the window at the Chicago skyline, at the planes glinting in the sun as they climbed toward the clouds. I thought about Sarah. She hadn't just saved an airline. She had saved me. She had taken a moment of profound ugliness and turned it into a foundation for a new kind of sky. I picked up my pen and opened the Employee Conduct Handbook. I turned to the first page, the one that talked about chain of command. I crossed it out in bold. Black ink. Underneath, I wrote, "The truth is the only command." I realized then that Sarah was right. We all have our 34 EE moments. But the real test isn't where you sit. It's what you do when you're finally given the power to stand up. I looked at the business card Sarah had given me that day on the plane. On the back, she had scribbled a note I hadn't seen until now. "The view from the front is better, but the work is done in the trenches. Welcome to the fight." I smiled, tucked the card into my desk drawer, and got back to work. The sky was still big, and there were a lot of back doors that needed to be turned into front ones.